Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Race for the Nomination. What are primary elections and why do they matter? I'm your host, Casey Eldred, and thanks for tuning in. On today's episode, we'll start the show by getting everyone on the same page. What exactly is a primary election? How do they work? Why is New Hampshire, a tiny state with only 4 electoral votes, so important? Who are the candidates? And finally, why does all of this matter? Then, for today's interview segment, we'll hear from Paul Lambert, the director of Politics FitzHugh, about how to stay informed and up-to-date during the election cycle. To end the show, we'll take a look at the numbers by breaking down the results of the most recent Franklin Pierce University and Boston Herald political poll to get an insight on the thoughts of New Hampshire voters leading up to the primary. So, to start off with the basics, what is a primary election in the United States, and why do they matter? Primary elections are used by each state party to determine the candidate they will choose to nominate to run in the general presidential election. Prior to 1968, the nomination process of the candidates had little to do with primary voters and a lot to do with smoke-filled backroom conversations and deals made behind closed doors. The McGovern-Fraser Commission is responsible for creating the direct link between primary voters and convention nominees that we know today. States either have an open primary, in which voters without party affiliations can vote, or a closed primary, in which only registered party voters can participate. You wouldn't really expect it, but the New Hampshire primary is a big deal in the grand scheme of presidential elections. New Hampshire's primary is the first in the nation and over time has come to hold so much influence over the rest of the election cycle. New Hampshire's primary is one of a kind in the fact that they mix both open and closed by allowing unaffiliated voters to participate in the primary of their choice. Being first may not seem important, but throughout history the significance of the New Hampshire primary has grown to the point of making the winner an instant frontrunner. A candidate's success, or lack of, can even lead to issues in financing. If a candidate does not perform well in New Hampshire, their campaign funds often begin to dry up. Many candidates that do not do well in New Hampshire either completely reevaluate their campaigns or leave the race altogether. Over time, the New Hampshire primary became so important it turned into a national media spectacle. In February 1964, the first primary election was covered by television networks, and hundreds of people from networks across the country flocked to New Hampshire to compete for the best political coverage. Today, news outlets and networks compete even more intensely in the world of constant online news coverage. Now, let's talk about the 2020 primary race so far. On the Republican side, incumbent President Trump does not have much serious opposition against him, and news about the Republican primary is few and far between. There have been no televised debates so far, and the odds seem to be in favor of President Trump receiving a second nomination. On the other hand, the Democratic primary has been causing headlines almost daily since late last year when people began to announce or allude to their candidacies. The Democratic race also has no clear frontrunner and more than a dozen candidates to choose from. The race for the Democratic nomination was so popular that the first televised debates of the 2020 season had to be split into 2 consecutive nights. The candidates had to reach a minimum of 2% support in the polling average to qualify for the debate. In the end, 20 candidates qualified for the 2-night debate. Since then, the number of candidates has dwindled, and the most recent Democratic debate had just 12 candidates qualify. The candidates are as follows: former Vice President Joe Biden, California Senator Kamala Harris, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, Hawaii Representative Tulsi Gabbard, entrepreneur and lawyer Andrew Yang, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, former United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Julian Castro, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, and hedge fund manager and liberal activist Tom Steyer. In the most recent debate on October 15th, the candidates remain heavily divided on the issue of Medicare for All, which has been a contentious one so far over the past 4 debates. Warren and Sanders are both proponents of it, while various other candidates, including Biden and Buttigieg, see the idea as unrealistic. Senator Klobuchar even referred to it as a pipe dream. Syria was an interesting topic of the debate because the decision was unanimous, aside from just one candidate. Gabbard did not agree with the rest of the candidates' opinions that it was a grave mistake for the United States to end Syrian assistance and remove troops. Other issues that are contributing to the race are environmental policy like Green New Deal, education issues like universal college and the cancellation of student debt, and immigration policy. Although televised debates used to be the most effective way to educate yourself on the candidates and the issues, that's not the case in 2019. Today, most people get their news from the internet, but how are you supposed to know what information is quality, current, and 100% factual? There are thousands and thousands of websites, social media accounts, and other forms of media online reporting and publishing news. Sophomore Paul Lambert is the director of Politics FitzU, the student-run political news outlet on campus. Paul works with the Fitzwater Center to host events on campus like the Pizza and Politics series that features presidential candidates and cover other political news. So what kinds of sources do you use when you read the news, and how do you decide?
So I'm all over the place. Again, as I said earlier, it's TV, it's social media, it's all that sort of stuff. Usually I go off of news stories. You got to make sure you're reading those stories, not just taking the clickbait or the headline or the soundbite or anything like that. That's how I decide. Is you have to read the full article, put it in context, and say, what does this mean? What does this really mean?
All right, Paul, thank you for joining me today, and we appreciate your time. Now on to our last segment, the numbers. Polling is a crucial component of the election cycle. As we saw with the qualifications for televised debates, poll results can mean a lot. They can indicate which candidates have a substantial following and see the age groups or different demographics that support a given candidate. Polls can also provide insight into the opinions voters have on certain issues, popular topics of conversation, or how closely voters follow the election process. In the most recent poll by Franklin Pierce University and the Boston Herald, they gathered the opinions of likely primary voters in New Hampshire. It has been clear for some time that the top three contenders of the Democratic primary are Sanders, Warren, and Biden. In the poll, they came out nearly deadlocked, with Warren at 24%, Biden at 24%, and Sanders at 22%. The poll also explored the option of other candidates joining the race and how voters would react. Democratic voters would be very supportive of Michelle Obama joining the race. The results show that she would have around 26% of the support, which would make her the frontrunner over Warren, Biden, and Sanders. Thanks for tuning in, and join us next time on Race for the Nomination for our second episode, Which Issues Matter and What Are the Candidates' Stances?